Hi everyone, welcome back to Healing Her Sacred Light. And as you can see by the title, in today's video, we are going to be discussing a topic within our womb attacks series. And that is, they were not witches. This video aims to bring light to a truth that's been buried for centuries. The women they called witches were never evil. They were powerful. And that power came from something deeper than titles or tools. It came from connection, a connection to earth and to the metaphysical. To walk the path of the so-called witch is to remember that everything is energy. Your thoughts shape your reality. Your words carry vibration. Your body holds wisdom, and your intuition is a sacred compass. These women chose inner knowing over external approval. This video is not just about history. It's about reclaiming the truth that women were persecuted not for darkness, but for their light. Let's get started. Before modern medicine, before patriarchal institutions, women were the healers of the earth. They worked with herbs, the cycles of the moon, and the power of the womb. They understood the sacred connection between the body and the land. But this wisdom was not just forgotten. It was stolen, demonized, and violently erased. Women had always been the keepers of herbal medicine, birth, and menstrual health. But as male-dominated medicine began to rise, these women were seen as a threat. What we call witch hunts were actually a centuries-long campaign to sever women from their healing traditions, spiritual authority, and reproductive autonomy. The so-called witch hunts were about power, control, and the systematic destruction of women's wisdom. Folk medicine and womb wisdom were demonized to make way for male-dominated religious and medical authority. As women were silenced, their roles as healers were replaced. The power of the womb was no longer honored. It was feared, controlled, and medicalized. Let's dive into the history. Between the 15th and 18th centuries in Europe, tens of thousands of women were tortured and executed, not for practicing dark magic, but for holding healing wisdom, midwifery, herbalism, and a connection to nature. Many were independent women, particularly those without male protectors. The accused women were publicly tortured, humiliated, and murdered, often with community support. Some of the brutal horrors women faced included burning at the stake, a terrifying spectacle that was used to silence women and make examples of them, hanging, and this was especially common in England and the American colonies. Everyone knows about the Salem witch trials of 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, where 26 people were executed. Yes, only 26 died in Salem. The real terror happened in Europe. Drowning. There was this thing they would do where they would tie a woman's left thumb to her right toe and throw her into a body of water. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent, but dead. Sexual violence and mutilation. Confessions were extracted under torture. Women were stripped, violated, and broken until they said what the inquisitors wanted to hear. They claimed these women were in league with the devil. But looking at the cruelty they carried out, it seems more like they were the ones in league with the devil. The witch trials didn't happen at random. They were fueled by the combination of religious dogma, political control, and economic greed. Let's talk about it. The Catholic Church was one of the main forces behind the witch hunts. In fact, on December 5th, 1484, there was a papal bull called Summus Desiderantes Affectibus, which means desiring with supreme ardor, issued by Pope Innocent VIII. And this officially declared witchcraft a threat to the church. It recognized the existence of witches and witchcraft and extended papal authority for the pursuit and imprisonment of witches. Women who healed, birthed, or communed with nature were branded as heretics or devil worshippers. This empowered inquisitors like Heinrich Kramer, a German churchman, by giving him and others the authority to hunt and execute women accused of witchcraft. In fact, he wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, which is the Hammer of Witches, in 1487, and this book became a manual for the persecution of women. The book claimed women were more prone to witchcraft due to their weaker intellect and carnal nature. Midwives and healers were identified as witches and devil's accomplices. This book justified torture, sexual violence, and execution to extract confessions. The witch hunts were not only driven by religious zeal, they were deeply political. Across Europe, royal rulers allied with the church to control society and eliminate anyone, especially women, who threatened the established order. Monarchs across Europe used witchcraft as a tool of power. The women they hunted weren't witches, they were threats to male authority. And this is just the simple truth. Monarchs ruled by divine right, claiming their power was God-given. By aligning with the church and condemning witches, they reinforced their authority, suppressed rebellion, and removed powerful, independent women who held land, healing knowledge, or spiritual influence. They collaborated with the church to silence women, seize land and gain wealth, control medicine and birth, and enforce religious obedience. Let's talk about some of those monarchs. There was Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. He issued the Carolina Code of 1532, and this was one of the first legal codes to define witchcraft as a capital offense. Notably, it specified that those found guilty of causing harm through witchcraft should be executed by burning, which contributed to the mass witch trials between 1580 and 1680. The code legalized torture and execution for witchcraft, empowering local courts to carry out deadly trials across the German-speaking world. James VI ruled Scotland before becoming James I of England in 1603, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. He was a devout believer in witchcraft. He didn't just support witch trials, he personally oversaw interrogations and authorized torture. Let me tell you the story of how he became obsessed with witches and witchcraft. In 1589, James was set to marry 14-year-old Anne of Denmark. But during her voyage to Scotland, a violent storm struck, forcing her ship to take refuge in Norway. James became convinced that the storm was not natural, that it was the work of witches trying to sabotage his marriage. Fueled by fear, ego, and religious zeal, James launched a wave of witch trials back home, most notably the North Berwick witch trials. Dozens of people, mostly women, were accused of using sorcery to raise storms. Many were tortured, forced to confess, and executed. His obsession didn't fade, it grew. In 1597, he published Demonology, a manual promoting the persecution of witches. It argued that witches were real, dangerous, and deserved to be hunted and punished. This manual endorsed torture and execution. It cited scripture and demonology, and taught others how to identify and punish witches. This text helped justify Scotland's brutal witch trials, which became some of the most vicious in Europe. Under his rule, parliaments passed laws criminalizing midwifery, herbal medicine, and any form of healing outside church and state control. And y'all, here is the craziest part of all. This same king who hunted witches, authorized torture, and criminalized women's healing arts also commissioned the King James Bible in 1611, a text that would shape English-speaking Christianity for centuries. In 1604, King James gathered nearly 50 scholars and clergymen, divided into 6 committees. Their assignment? To create a new English translation of the Bible that was not only linguistically elegant, but also aligned with royal authority. By 1611, the translation was complete. the King James Version of the Holy Bible that we all know today. This wasn't just scripture, it was strategy. Religion, monarchy, and male authority were woven into one cultural weapon and stamped with the seal of divine law. The witch hunts were an economically profitable system, especially in rural towns where land was limited and women's independence threatened the status quo. Accusations were often strategic, a way to take valuable land under the guise of spiritual cleansing. Accused witches, especially older widows without male heirs, often owned land, property, or wealth, and once accused, their property was legally seized by the church or the crown. Outside of Europe, many women were also persecuted, labeled as rebellious, dangerous, or possessed. The intention was the same, to sever women from their power, their culture, and their wisdom. They faced enslavement, rape, and forced assimilation. Their healing and spiritual traditions were criminalized. During the height of the Spanish Inquisition and the Catholic Counter-Reformation, Spain rose as a global empire. Its power enforced through religious conformity, colonization, and spiritual warfare. As Catholic forces expanded into the Americas, Africa, and the Philippines, missionaries arrived beside soldiers. Indigenous ceremonies, midwifery, womb care, herbal medicine, ancestor veneration, and menstrual rites were condemned as witchcraft or devil worship. These sacred practices were outlawed, and those who kept them alive were punished, imprisoned, or executed. Anything that honored nature, spirit, or feminine power was seen as a threat. Entire communities were forced to convert, and traditional healers and spiritual leaders were labeled sorcerers, demon-possessed, or barbaric. Many were tortured or killed. Women were stripped of authority, confined to submissive roles, while indigenous cosmologies were replaced by a Catholic hierarchy, placing all spiritual power in the hands of male clergy. This was not just colonization. It was a war against the feminine, against earth, and against ancestral knowing. Male doctors sanctioned by the church also gained wealth from the removal of women healers. The witch hunts were never about dark magic. They were about silencing women who lived outside control. They were an attack on the feminine body, the wisdom of the earth, the power of healing without permission, regulation, or domination. And guess what? The witch hunts are not ancient history. It's a current crisis. And it reflects the same systemic injustice, a world still afraid of women in their full power. In Tanzania, older women, often widows, are blamed when crops fail or illness strikes. They are beaten, mutilated, or burned alive. In Ghana, accused women are cast out and forced into isolated witch camps. In Papua New Guinea, women are tortured for sanguma, sorcery, and killed in front of crowds. In Indonesia, women believed to practice magic are stoned, beaten, and sometimes executed. Even in places where there are no active witch hunts, their legacy still lives on. The violence has shifted form, but the intention remains to disconnect us from our power. For example, we are told that our menstrual cycles are dirty, shameful, or inconvenient. Birth is framed as too dangerous without intervention, and through fear, hospitals push epidurals, inductions, and surgeries that turn a sacred rite into profit. Many male doctors have violated women's bodies under the guise of care. Our pain is often ignored, our symptoms dismissed, and we are often labeled dramatic or crazy, then numbed with pills. Our intuition is dismissed as unscientific, irrational, or irrelevant. Midwives are regulated, marginalized, and often erased from birth spaces. Herbalists and natural healers are censored, mocked, or criminalized by the FDA, just as folk healers were once silenced by the church. Even now, when a woman listens to her body, works with plants, or honors the earth, they, especially the religious ones, call it witchcraft. In conclusion, the word witch was a weapon used against women who lived with power, freedom, and ancestral knowing. From Europe to Africa, from the Caribbean to the Americas to Asia, healers were targeted, not for harming, but for knowing, not for dark power, but for feminine power. The wound may still live in us, but so does the wisdom. We are the descendants of women who remembered, of women who healed, of women who refused to be erased. Now we remember them. We rise with them. We carry the medicine forward. Honor your lineage. Reclaim your womb. Return to the divine mother, not as witches, but as daughters of the earth, as womb keepers, as sacred voices returned. The spirit of the ancient healers lives on in every woman who chooses to heal, to remember, to awaken. The question is, will you reclaim your power? Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more womb wisdom and ancestral healing. Thanks you all. I'll see you in the next one.